During the wedding toast, my friend leaned over and said, "Can you believe your ex was actually invited here?" The champagne glass nearly slipped from my hand. "He's here right now?" "Yeah, he's at the bar right there. But don't worry, he did anger management and he's supposedly a totally different person." I turned and saw him across the reception hall chatting with the groom. The last time I'd seen him, Liam, I'd been on the bathroom floor spitting teeth into my palm while he stood over me fixing his hair in the mirror. Now he was laughing, holding a beer. Then he saw me watching. He raised his glass in a small toast and smiled. Not his old aggressive smile. Something softer. Apologetic. I excused myself to the bathroom, my heels clicking too loud on the marble floor. In the mirror, I fixed my lipstick with shaking hands and told myself maybe he had changed. Maybe I could get through the wedding. But when I came out, he was waiting in the hallway. I froze, but he held up both hands, palms out. He said, "I know you don't want to talk to me. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. The therapy made me understand what I did." His voice was different, calmer. He said, "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm different now." I walked past him and he let me go. He even stepped aside to give me more room. Back at the reception, I tried to relax. Maybe he really had changed. 20 minutes later, a groomsman I didn't know approached me. He said, "You're the maid of honor, right? The bride needs you on the roof deck." Something about her dress. I said, "What's wrong with her dress?" He said, "I don't know. She just said it's an emergency and to get you right away." I followed him to the service elevator. He pressed the button for the roof and said, "She's pretty upset. Something tore." The elevator opened to the roof deck where the venue sometimes did ceremonies. But it was dark, no lights on, and I didn't see the bride anywhere. I turned to ask the groomsman, but he was already back in the elevator, doors closing. I called out, "Wait!" But the doors shut. I pulled out my phone to call the bride but had no signal up here. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Liam stepped out from behind the ventilation unit. He said, "She's not coming. Her dress is fine." My blood went cold. I ran for the elevator, but he was faster, blocking me. I tried to dodge around him, but he grabbed my wrist. The familiar grip that left bruises for weeks. He said, "That was my cousin who brought you up. Told him you and I needed to talk privately about the restraining order. He was happy to help. And don't worry, he won't tell anyone you were dumb enough to follow me. He'll say he never saw you, no matter what happens." I tried to pull away, but he twisted my arm behind my back, forcing me toward the edge of the roof. I swung my purse at his face with my free hand, but he caught it, yanking it away and throwing it over the side. I drove my heel into his shin and he cursed, loosening his grip. I spun and kneed him in the stomach. He doubled over and I ran for the stairwell door, but it was locked from inside. A padlock hung from the handle. He'd planned everything. He recovered fast, grabbing my hair and slamming my head against the metal door. Blood filled my mouth. He did it again and I felt my nose crunch. He started dragging me by my hair to the edge, my scalp burning. I clawed at his hands, ripping skin off his knuckles, but he wouldn't let go. He said, "You think you're safe because I went to some classes? Because I can say the right words now?" That's when I noticed a piece of rebar from construction debris. I grabbed it and swung it backward, catching him in the ribs. He grunted and let go. I scrambled away, but he caught my dress, the fabric ripping as he pulled me back. He pushed me against the ledge, bending me backward. The city lights spun below. He said, "You're going to tell everyone you lied, that you fell, that I tried to help." I said, "Never." He said, "Or you jump." I thought I had no way out, until I saw the brick near my feet. I pretended to lose my balance, letting go with one hand, and shot down to quickly grab it. I swung the brick hard as I could at his temple, but he caught my wrist mid-swing. We started fighting for the brick, spinning dangerously close to the edge, our feet skidding on the gravel. I bit his hand until I tasted blood. He cursed and his grip loosened. I wrenched the brick free and brought it down on his foot. He howled and stumbled back, limping. I ran for the elevator, frantically pressing the button, but he tackled me from behind. My chin hit the concrete and I bit through my tongue. We rolled across the roof, him ending up on top, his hands around my throat, his thumbs pressed into my windpipe. I scratched at his eyes, feeling my nail catch his eyelid, but my vision was going black. My hand found broken glass from an old bottle. I slashed wildly at his arm, opening a long gash. He reared back screaming and I pushed him off, crawling toward the elevator again. Blood from my nose was choking me. He caught my ankle at the very edge of the roof, his bloody hand slipping but holding on. He dragged me back, my fingernails breaking as I clawed uselessly at the concrete. My dress tore completely up the side. He flipped me over and lifted me onto the ledge, my back arching over nothing. My legs dangled over 5 stories of air. He held my wrists, the only thing keeping me from falling backward into space. Blood from his arm dripped onto my face. He leaned close and whispered, "Choose now, confession or gravity." I threw my weight sideways with everything left in me, twisting hard enough that we both lost balance. We crashed onto the gravel away from the edge, his hands breaking free from my wrists as we hit the rough surface. I scrambled forward on my hands and knees, gravel digging into my palms, gasping and choking on the blood filling my throat. My vision blurred, but I could see the elevator maybe 20 feet away. I crawled faster, my torn dress catching under my knees, hearing him grunt behind me as he tried to get up. My lungs burned and I couldn't get enough air through my broken nose. I made it to the elevator and slammed my palm against the button over and over, leaving bloody handprints on the metal. The doors opened and I threw myself inside, hitting every button I could reach with my shaking hands. Liam lunged toward me, but the doors slid shut with him inches away, his bloody handprint smearing across the metal as he tried to force them open. I collapsed against the back wall as the elevator started going down, my whole body shaking so hard I couldn't stand. My legs gave out and I slid to the floor, tasting copper and feeling my face swelling. The elevator seemed to move so slowly, each floor taking forever, and I kept thinking he'd somehow get the doors open. When they finally opened at the reception level, I stumbled out into the bright hallway. The lights hurt my eyes after the dark roof. My dress was torn almost completely up one side and covered in blood. My face felt huge and wrong, swelling fast, and blood dripped from my chin onto the marble floor. A waiter carrying a tray of glasses saw me, and the tray crashed to the ground, glass exploding everywhere. Someone screamed, and then people were running toward me. Courtney got to me first and caught me before I fell, her face going completely white. She was asking what happened, but I couldn't make words come out through my split lip and the blood filling my mouth. I tried to say his name, but only a choking sound came out. More people crowded around us now, their shocked faces blurring together into a mass of open mouths and wide eyes. I heard someone say to call an ambulance and someone else asking where all the blood was coming from. The venue manager pushed through the crowd and immediately pulled out his phone, calling 911 while using his other hand to move people back. He brought me a chair and a stack of white towels, speaking in a calm voice that somehow cut through my panic. I pressed a towel to my face and it turned red immediately. Someone in the crowd said Liam just came down looking messed up and left through the back exit before anyone could stop him. The venue manager repeated that information into his phone to the 911 operator. Paramedics arrived 8 minutes later and started treating my injuries right there in the hallway. One of them cleaned the blood from my face with gentle hands while asking me questions I could barely answer. The other one checked my pupils with a small light and carefully felt around my neck, saying something about stabilizing it. They wrapped gauze around my head and put an ice pack on my nose. One paramedic said the ER doctor would need to look at me more carefully, but they needed to stop the bleeding first. 2 police officers showed up and started taking statements from people who saw me come off the elevator. I told them everything in broken sentences while the paramedic bandaged my head, the words coming out wrong and jumbled. I said Liam attacked me on the roof and tried to throw me off. One officer wrote everything down while the other one radioed someone, saying this needed someone from the assault unit right away and asking for Detective Sutton. They loaded me onto a stretcher and wheeled me to the ambulance. The ride to the hospital was bumpy and every movement hurt. At the ER, a doctor with gray hair came in and started documenting every injury with a camera and detailed notes on a tablet. She said I had a broken nose, a concussion, cuts on my scalp and chin, bruising around my throat, and defensive wounds on my hands and arms. She took pictures of everything and wrote down exactly how each injury looked. She said I was lucky to be alive after what he did to me. Detective Sutton arrived around midnight, a tall woman with short dark hair and sharp eyes. She pulled up a chair next to my hospital bed and took out a notebook. She was professional and direct, not treating me like I was fragile. She explained that Nathaniel's involvement made this conspiracy to commit assault, which was more serious than just a regular attack. I told her about the padlocked stairwell door and how Liam planned everything, even getting his cousin to help. I saw concern in her eyes when I mentioned the planning, like she was already thinking about how hard it would be to prove. They kept me overnight because of the concussion, the nurse saying someone needed to wake me up every few hours to check on me. I lay in the hospital bed unable to sleep, jumping every time I heard footsteps in the hallway or a door closing somewhere. My phone sat on the table next to me, showing 17 missed calls from my parents, Hannah, Dylan, and numbers I didn't know. I couldn't face talking to anyone yet, couldn't explain what happened, couldn't hear their voices asking questions I didn't have answers for. Light started coming through the window around 6 in the morning and I hadn't slept at all. A nurse came in to check my vital signs and brought me some water and crackers that I couldn't eat. Detective Sutton showed up an hour later carrying a coffee and a folder full of papers. She pulled up the same chair from last night and opened the folder. She told me Nathaniel was denying everything when they questioned him earlier that morning. He said he never spoke to me at the wedding and had no idea how I ended up on the roof. She said the venue was pulling all their security footage, but the roof cameras weren't working that night, which seemed convenient. I asked if that meant he'd get away with it, and she said not necessarily. They just needed to build the case differently. The discharge nurse arrived around 9 with a stack of prescriptions and a long list of instructions about watching for concussion symptoms. She went through each warning sign twice while I tried to focus through the headache. My parents arrived just as the nurse finished, my mom rushing in and stopping when she saw my face. She started crying immediately and came over to hug me carefully, avoiding all the bandages. Dad stood in the doorway looking at me with his jaw so tight I could see the muscle jumping. He didn't say anything, but he picked up my bag and signed the discharge papers while Mom helped me into a wheelchair. The drive home took 3 hours and nobody talked much. Mom kept turning around to look at me in the back seat, and Dad's hand stayed clenched on the steering wheel the whole time. We stopped once for gas, and I stayed in the car because I couldn't handle people staring. When we got to their house, Dad carried my bag upstairs to my old room, and Mom made tea I didn't drink. My phone started ringing around dinner time and I saw Hannah's name. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She was sobbing and saying she had no idea Liam would do something like this, that she felt terrible. Then she said Dylan was really mad at me for causing a scene and ruining their wedding reception. The words hit me like getting punched again, and I hung up without saying anything. I turned my phone off and went to bed, even though it was only 7. 2 days later, Detective Sutton called while I was eating breakfast at my parents' kitchen table. She said the elevator security footage showed Nathaniel pressing the roof button with me standing next to him, then him leaving alone 30 seconds later. It wasn't definite proof he was helping Liam, but it proved he was lying about never talking to me. She was bringing him in for another interview that afternoon. I asked what would happen if he kept lying, and she said they'd keep building the case with what they had. On day 4, my mom drove me to the courthouse downtown so I could start getting a protective order against Liam. The clerk behind the counter walked me through the paperwork and explained I'd have a hearing within 2 weeks. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the pen, and my handwriting looked like a child's. Halfway through filling out the forms, I had to run to the bathroom and throw up. I came back and finished the paperwork with the clerk watching me with worried eyes. She said I was doing the right thing and gave me copies of everything. That night, I was lying in bed when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. The message said Liam had really changed, and I made him lose control by rejecting his apology. It said if I told the truth about what I did to make him mad, we could both move forward. I took screenshots of everything with shaking hands and sent them to Detective Sutton right away. She texted back within 5 minutes saying she'd document it and contact his probation officer. My work called the next morning asking when I'd be back, and I realized I couldn't face going to the office yet. My supervisor listened while I explained what happened, but her voice sounded weird, like she thought I was making it up to get time off. The doubt in her tone made me feel sick and angry at the same time. I told her I'd let her know when I could return and hung up before she could say anything else. Detective Sutton called that afternoon with an update about the padlock they found on the roof stairwell door. She said the venue checked their equipment and the padlock didn't match anything they owned. Someone brought it specifically to trap me up there. She was trying to trace where it was purchased, but it was a common brand sold at every hardware store in the city. I asked if that helped prove Liam planned everything, and she said it helped but wasn't definite proof by itself. A man named Xavier Wolf from the district attorney's office called 2 days later to talk about the case. He explained that without Nathaniel agreeing to testify and with limited physical proof of planning ahead, proving conspiracy would be really hard. He said he could definitely charge Liam with assault and battery, but the attempted murder charge might not stick. I asked why not when Liam literally tried to throw me off a roof, and Xavier said proving intent was complicated. He wanted to meet in person to go over everything. I met Xavier at his office downtown the next day, and he walked me through what a trial would look like. He said I'd have to testify about every detail of the attack, and Liam's lawyer would try to make me look bad. He mentioned that Liam was claiming I attacked him first, and he was just defending himself. The lie was so crazy I actually started laughing, but then I was crying instead. Xavier handed me tissues and said that's why he wanted me to understand what we were up against before deciding how to move forward. I left Xavier's office feeling sick and scared about having to testify. My phone rang in the parking garage and I saw Dylan's name on the screen. I should have ignored it, but I answered anyway. He started talking before I could say anything, his voice tight and angry. He told me Liam was his college roommate and a good guy who made one mistake. He said I should have just talked to Liam at the wedding instead of getting the police involved. I tried to explain that Liam literally tried to throw me off a roof and kill me. Dylan cut me off mid-sentence and said I was being dramatic and making everything worse than it was. He said Liam told him I attacked first, and he was just defending himself. The lie made my hands shake so hard I almost dropped the phone. I hung up without saying anything else and immediately blocked his number. Hannah's husband thought I was the problem, not the man who tried to murder me. I sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to stop crying before I could drive home. My apartment felt wrong when I got back, like the walls were too close and the shadows were watching me. Every small sound made me jump. The refrigerator humming, a car door slamming outside, footsteps in the hallway above me. I checked the locks on my door 3 times in 10 minutes. Then I checked them again. I called my parents that night and told them I couldn't stay in my apartment anymore. Mom and Dad drove up the next morning with Dad's truck. We started packing my things into boxes, my hands shaking the whole time. Every shadow moving across the window made my heart race. I kept looking at the door, expecting Liam to somehow appear even though the protective order said he had to stay away. We found a smaller apartment across town that had better security. The building had a doorman who checked everyone coming in and cameras in every hallway. The rent was $200 more per month than I could really afford, but I signed the lease anyway. I needed to feel safe more than I needed to save money. The protective order hearing happened 2 weeks after the attack. I had to sit in the courthouse waiting room for 40 minutes before they called my case. My stomach hurt the whole time. Then I saw Liam walk in with his lawyer. Matthias Powell wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my car. Liam looked calm and put together. Nothing like the man who had tried to kill me. The judge called us into the courtroom and Matthias started objecting to everything Xavier said. He objected to the photos of my injuries, claiming they were too graphic. He objected to my written statement, saying it was biased. He objected to the timeline Detective Sutton had put together. The judge looked annoyed and told Matthias to sit down and be quiet. She reviewed the photos of my broken nose, the bruises on my throat, the cuts on my scalp. She looked at Liam and asked if he had anything to say for himself. Matthias answered for him, claiming Liam acted in self-defense. The judge cut him off and said she was asking Liam, not his lawyer. Liam stood up and said he was sorry for what happened, but I had attacked him first. The lie came out of his mouth so smoothly, like he actually believed it. The judge granted the protective order for 6 months. Liam had to stay at least 500 feet away from me at all times. No contact through phone, email, social media, or third parties. If he violated it even once, he would be arrested immediately. I felt a tiny bit of relief for the first time in weeks. Detective Sutton called me 3 days later with news about Nathaniel. She said the phone company had provided location data for his cell phone. The data showed he was on the roof level of the venue building at the exact time I was attacked. She brought him in for another interview and confronted him with the evidence. He still refused to admit he helped Liam. His lawyer said the data just proved Nathaniel was in the building. Not that he did anything wrong. Maybe he went up to the roof for some other reason. Maybe he was looking for a quiet place to make a phone call. Detective Sutton said she was still building the case, but it was frustrating. I started seeing Josephine Holt the following week. She was a trauma counselor who worked specifically with assault survivors. Her office was small and quiet with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. She explained that my constant fear and jumpiness were normal responses to what happened. She called it hypervigilance, my brain trying to protect me by staying alert for danger all the time. She taught me grounding techniques for when the panic attacks hit. 5 things I could see, 4 things I could touch, 3 things I could hear, 2 things I could smell, 1 thing I could taste. The first session I cried for 45 minutes straight and couldn't stop. Josephine just sat there with me and let me cry without trying to make me stop or feel better. She said crying was part of processing the trauma. Courtney was one of the only friends who stayed in regular contact. She came over to my new apartment one evening with takeout food. We sat on my couch eating, and she admitted that our mutual friends were choosing sides. Some people believed Liam's version of events where I was the one who attacked him. They remembered seeing him at the wedding acting calm and friendly, being polite and apologetic. They couldn't picture that same man trying to murder someone. Courtney said a few people had asked her if I was lying or exaggerating to get attention. The betrayal hurt almost as much as my physical injuries. These were people I had known for years. People I thought were my friends. 3 weeks after the attack, someone knocked hard on my apartment door at 2 in the morning. The sound woke me up from a nightmare, and for a second I thought Liam had found me. I grabbed my phone and called 911 immediately, whispering to the operator that someone was at my door. I looked through the peephole but saw nothing. The hallway was empty. The police arrived 12 minutes later and found a note taped to my door. It said, "Drop the charges," in block letters written with a black marker. There was no security footage of who left it, because the hallway camera had a blind spot right at my door. The officers dusted for fingerprints but found nothing. Detective Sutton filed a report and said she would try to prove it was Liam, but there was no evidence connecting him to the note. The venue manager called Detective Sutton a few days later with important news. They had found additional security footage from a camera angle they missed during the first review. This camera was pointed at the service elevator from a different direction. The footage clearly showed Nathaniel leading me to the elevator and pressing the button for the roof level. Then it showed him coming back down alone 90 seconds later. His face looked worried, and he kept looking around like he was checking if anyone saw him. Detective Sutton said this was the strongest evidence yet of his involvement in the attack. Josephine helped me create a detailed safety routine during our second session. I started taking different routes to and from work each day so no one could predict my schedule. I checked in with my parents at set times every morning and evening. If I missed a check-in, they knew to call the police. I bought pepper spray and kept one in every bag I owned. I never went anywhere alone after dark, not even to the grocery store. Living this way was exhausting and made me feel like a prisoner. But it was better than the constant terror of thinking Liam could show up anywhere at any time. Liam's social media posts started appearing around week 4. He never mentioned me by name, but the posts were obviously about me. He wrote things like, "Some people will lie about anything for attention, and crazy exes will ruin your life if you let them." He posted about false accusations destroying innocent men. Our mutual friends could tell exactly who he meant. Some of them commented with support, telling him to stay strong and that the truth would come out. I watched my social circle shrink in real time as people picked sides. Each supportive comment on his posts felt like another friend choosing him over me. Xavier called 3 days later while I was making dinner. He got right to it without small talk. Matthias was pushing for a mutual no-contact order instead of just me having protection from Liam. The idea made them look equally dangerous to each other, like we were both the problem. Xavier told me not to agree because it would hurt our case badly. It would make the jury think I was violent too, not just defending myself. Then he warned me that Matthias was planning to use my actions on the roof as proof I was the real aggressor. The brick, the glass, the scratches on Liam's face. They were going to say I attacked him first, and he was just protecting himself. I wanted to scream into the phone that I was fighting for my life, that every mark on him came from me trying not to die. But Xavier already knew that. He said we just had to make sure the jury understood it too. Josephine brought up call recording during our next session. She said Detective Sutton had approved it if Liam contacted me again. I could use a recording app on my phone and it would be legal evidence as long as one party knew about it, which would be me. She walked me through downloading the app and testing it. 2 days later, a call came from another number I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I opened the recording app and pressed the red button, then answered. Liam's voice came through, soft and apologetic at first. He said he was sorry for everything, that he never meant to hurt me, that the therapy was really helping him understand his actions. I stayed quiet, letting him talk. Then his tone started changing. He said I had forced his hand by rejecting his apology at the wedding, that I humiliated him in front of everyone by making a scene. His voice got harder with each sentence. He said I always knew how to push his buttons, that I made him lose control on purpose, so I could play the victim. The mask was slipping in real time and the app was catching every word. I ended the call when he started getting louder and saved the recording immediately. I brought the recording to Xavier's office the next morning with Detective Sutton joining us. We sat in the conference room and played it through the laptop speakers. Xavier and Sutton exchanged looks when Liam's voice shifted from apologetic to blaming. It wasn't a direct confession to planning the attack, but it showed his mindset clearly. The way he justified his violence, the way he blamed me for his actions, the way his control cracked when I didn't respond how he wanted. Xavier said this helped establish Liam's pattern of manipulation and controlling behavior. It proved the anger management classes hadn't actually changed anything underneath. Sutton said it contradicted his story about the roof being a misunderstanding. We now had stronger evidence for the assault charges to stick instead of getting reduced to something minor. The protective order extension hearing happened at week 7. I sat on one side of the courtroom with Xavier while Liam sat on the other side with Matthias. Matthias argued that I was harassing his client by pursuing criminal charges when the original 6-month order was enough protection. He said Liam had complied with every requirement, attended all his classes, and stayed away from me completely. He made it sound like I was the one causing problems by not letting it go. Then the judge asked to review the evidence. Xavier presented the threatening note from my door, the recording of Liam's call and printouts of his social media posts about crazy exes and false accusations. The judge listened to the recording with no expression, then looked at the social media posts for a long time. Finally, she said the order would be extended for another full year. Liam's jaw clenched, but he didn't say anything. Matthias tried to object, but the judge cut him off and said the decision was final. Work was getting harder every day. I couldn't focus on anything for more than 10 minutes before my mind would spiral back to the roof. My hands would start shaking during meetings for no reason. I'd have to excuse myself to the bathroom when the panic hit and I couldn't breathe right. My supervisor noticed. She called me into her office for a performance review and I knew it was coming. She had my recent project reports spread across her desk, all of them late or incomplete. She started asking what was going on and I just broke. Everything came out in a rush. The wedding, the roof, the attack, the hospital, the court hearings, the nightmares, the constant fear. I couldn't stop crying once I started. She came around the desk and closed the office door, then sat next to me instead of across from me. Her whole attitude changed. She said she had no idea, that I should have told her sooner. She arranged for me to work from home 3 days a week starting immediately. She said my job was safe and to take whatever time I needed to recover. A woman from the wedding catering company called Detective Sutton out of nowhere during week 6. Sutton called me right after to tell me about it. The caterer remembered seeing me come off the elevator that night looking scared and badly hurt. She also remembered seeing Liam exit the same elevator maybe 30 seconds before me, and he looked rough too. His shirt had blood on it and his face was scratched up. She'd thought about it for weeks and finally decided she needed to tell someone what she saw. Her timeline matched mine exactly, and contradicted Liam's story about trying to help me after I fell. Sutton said this was solid testimony from a neutral witness who had no reason to lie for either side. It proved Liam was on that roof with me and came down looking like he'd been in a fight, not like he'd been trying to help someone who fell. The venue's insurance company got involved because they could be sued over the broken roof cameras and the mysterious padlock. Their investigator was a middle-aged guy in a cheap suit who interviewed me in Xavier's office. He asked detailed questions about everything and took notes on a yellow legal pad. He wanted to know about the cameras, the padlock, the lighting, the stairwell door. Xavier sat with me the whole time and stopped a few questions he thought were inappropriate. The investigator reviewed all the police reports and Detective Sutton's evidence file. 2 weeks later, he came back with an offer. The insurance company would pay $18,000 to cover my medical bills if I signed an NDA about the venue's security problems. I couldn't talk publicly about the cameras not working or the padlock that shouldn't have been there. Xavier said I should seriously think about taking it. The money would help a lot, and we didn't need to sue the venue to make the criminal case against Liam. Nathaniel appeared across the street from my office building on a Tuesday afternoon. I was leaving work early, one of my work-from-home days, when I saw him standing by a food truck just watching my building's entrance. He wasn't hiding. He wanted me to see him. I pulled out my phone and called Detective Sutton before I even left the lobby. She said she'd send a patrol car immediately and told me to stay inside with security until they arrived. I watched through the glass doors as Nathaniel kept standing there, drinking coffee, checking his phone, looking up at the building every few minutes. The patrol car showed up 12 minutes later, but by then he was gone. The officers took my statement and called Sutton with an update. She documented it as witness intimidation and called Nathaniel's lawyer with an official warning. But he still hadn't been charged with anything for helping Liam trap me on that roof. Josephine started me on exposure therapy during our next session. She explained that avoiding elevators and heights forever would let Liam take those things from me permanently. We needed to slowly face those fears in a controlled way. We started so small it felt silly. Just standing next to an elevator in her building's lobby while it opened and closed. My heart was racing, but nothing bad happened. The next week we rode one floor up together, then immediately back down. She stayed next to me the whole time, talking in a calm voice, reminding me to breathe. It was scary, but I was so mad at the idea of Liam controlling my life like this. I refused to let him make me afraid of basic things like elevators. We did it again the following week, going up 2 floors this time. My hands were sweating and I felt dizzy. but I made it through. Xavier called me into his office during week 8 with news about a plea deal. He had his serious lawyer face on when I sat down. Matthias had approached him with an offer. Liam would plead guilty to aggravated assault, serve 2 years of probation with mandatory domestic violence counseling, and the protective order would stay active the whole time. No jail time, but he'd have a felony conviction on his record forever. Xavier explained that going to trial was always risky. Juries were unpredictable. Even with all our evidence, Matthias was good at his job and might convince them to go with a lesser charge. We could end up with just a misdemeanor battery conviction, or even an acquittal if the jury believed Liam's self-defense story. The plea deal guaranteed a felony conviction and mandatory treatment. It wasn't perfect, but it was certain. I left Xavier's office that afternoon with paperwork explaining the plea deal terms and 3 days to decide. The walk back to my car felt longer than usual, and I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes just staring at the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to push for trial and watch Liam get dragged through every detail of what he did to me on that roof. But Xavier's words kept playing in my head about juries being unpredictable, and how Matthias might convince them it was mutual combat or self-defense. I called Josephine that evening and asked if I could come in the next day instead of waiting for our regular appointment. She moved things around and saw me at noon. I brought all the paperwork and we went through it together line by line. She asked what outcome would help me heal the most, and I realized I didn't actually know. Revenge felt good when I imagined it, but Josephine pointed out that trials could take a year or more, and I'd be stuck in this limbo the whole time. The guaranteed felony conviction meant Liam would have that on his record forever when he applied for jobs or housing. The mandatory counseling might not change him, but at least someone would be monitoring him and documenting if he refused to participate. On day 3, I met with Xavier again and told him I'd accept the plea deal, but only if it included full restitution for my medical bills. He nodded and said that was reasonable, and he'd present it to Matthias. The negotiation took another week of back-and-forth phone calls. Matthias came back with an offer of $8,000 when my actual costs were over $15,000 from the emergency room, follow-up appointments, medications, and therapy sessions. Xavier sent him my itemized bills and pushed back hard. They settled on $12,000 paid in monthly installments over 2 years, plus Liam had to complete 200 hours of community service at a domestic violence shelter. Xavier called me with the final terms and asked if I could live with it. I said yes, even though the number still felt low. At least it was something, and the community service requirement felt like poetic justice. The plea hearing got scheduled for week 12, and I had to take the morning off work. I drove to the courthouse alone because I didn't want my parents there seeing Liam again. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that buzzed. I sat in the gallery behind Xavier while we waited for the judge. Then Matthias walked in with Liam right behind him wearing a dark suit that made him look like a different person. My hands started shaking and I gripped the bench in front of me. Liam sat at the defense table and didn't look in my direction once during the whole hearing. The judge came in and everyone stood, then sat back down. Xavier presented the plea agreement terms, and the judge asked Liam to confirm he understood what he was pleading guilty to. Liam stood and said yes in a flat voice. Then the judge asked him to explain in his own words what happened, and Liam gave this statement full of passive language about the incident, and how there was mutual conflict that got out of hand. He never said he attacked me or trapped me on that roof. He made it sound like we both lost our tempers during an argument. The judge stopped him halfway through and asked directly if he grabbed me and tried to force me off the roof. Liam hesitated, then said things escalated beyond what he intended. The judge's face hardened, and she spent 5 minutes lecturing him about minimizing violence and taking responsibility. She said his statement showed exactly why he needed the counseling, and that she'd be monitoring his compliance personally. Then she accepted the plea and set the sentencing date for 3 weeks later. I walked out of that courtroom feeling hollow instead of relieved. A week after the plea hearing, Hannah texted asking if we could meet for coffee to talk. I almost said no, but decided I owed it to our friendship to at least hear her out. We met at a cafe near her apartment, and she hugged me when I arrived, but it felt stiff and awkward. She ordered a latte and spent the first 10 minutes talking about her honeymoon in Greece and how beautiful the islands were. Then she finally brought up the wedding and said she wanted to apologize for how everything happened. But instead of actually apologizing, she started talking about how the attack ruined their reception, and how the photographer couldn't use half the pictures because people looked upset or shocked in the background. She said the venue manager refunded part of their deposit, but it didn't make up for the memories that got destroyed. I just sat there listening and realized she was making this about her wedding, instead of about me almost dying. When I tried to explain that I was the one who got hurt, she cut me off and said she understood but couldn't. I see how it affected her special day too. I put money on the table for my untouched coffee and told her I needed to go. She called after me asking when we could talk again, but I kept walking. Our friendship couldn't survive her seeing me as the problem instead of Liam. The guilty plea became public record, and some of Liam's social media supporters finally backed off. 3 people who'd been commenting on his posts about false accusations sent me private messages apologizing for doubting my story. One woman said she'd been in an abusive relationship herself, and felt ashamed for not believing me sooner. But plenty of others doubled down and started claiming Liam only pled guilty because the system was biased against men, and he couldn't afford to risk a trial. They said the fact that I wasn't seriously injured proved I was exaggerating. I spent hours reading these comments and feeling my blood pressure spike with each one. Finally, I just deleted all my social media accounts because monitoring them was destroying my mental health more than losing the connections was worth. The venue's insurance company sent their settlement offer 6 weeks after the attack. $18,000 to cover medical bills, therapy costs, and moving expenses. The letter included a non-disclosure agreement that prevented me from discussing their security failures publicly or posting about it online. Xavier looked it over and said it was standard and the amount was reasonable given my documented expenses. I signed the papers and the check arrived a week later. I used part of it to pay off my credit cards that I'd maxed out covering costs insurance didn't handle. The rest went into savings for continued therapy since Josephine said I'd probably need sessions for at least another year. Having that financial cushion meant I could breathe a little easier and stop lying awake at night calculating how I'd make rent. Moving day came on a Saturday and my parents drove up to help. The new apartment was smaller than my old place, but the building had security cameras in every hallway, a doorman who checked all visitors against a list and deadbolts on every door. My dad walked through inspecting everything while my mom helped me unpack boxes. Before they left, my dad pulled out his toolbox and installed additional locks on the front door and a security bar for the sliding glass door to the balcony. I hadn't asked him to do it, but watching him work made my throat tight. My mom hugged me for a long time before they got in their car, and I cried on the couch for an hour after they drove away. But that night I slept better than I had in months, because for the first time I actually felt safe in my own space. Work started improving gradually as I rebuilt my focus and confidence. My supervisor, who'd seemed skeptical at first, became an unexpected ally after I showed her the court documents. She started checking in regularly and ran interference when I needed accommodations like working from home on bad days. 2 months after the attack, she assigned me to a new project developing training materials for the sales team. It was creative work that I actually enjoyed, and having something to focus on besides legal proceedings felt like a tiny piece of normalcy returning. I threw myself into it and started staying late some nights just because I wanted to finish sections instead of because I had to. A nightmare woke me up at 3 in the morning during my 3rd week in the new apartment. I was back on the roof with Liam's hands around my throat and I couldn't breathe. I jerked awake, gasping, and my heart was hammering. So hard I thought I might pass out. But instead of spiraling into a full panic attack, I used the grounding techniques Josephine had taught me. 5 things I could see in the dark bedroom. 4 things I could touch, like the soft blanket and cool pillowcase. 3 things I could hear, including the hum of the refrigerator and distant traffic. 2 things I could smell, which was harder, but I focused on the laundry detergent scent from my sheets. 1 thing I could taste, which was just the stale feeling in my mouth from sleep. My heart rate slowed as I went through each sense, and after 20 minutes I felt calm enough to lie back down. It was a small victory, but it felt huge because I'd managed to stop the panic spiral myself without calling anyone or turning on every light in the apartment. Josephine suggested a therapeutic exercise during our next session that made my stomach drop when she first described it. She wanted me to visit a different building's rooftop during the day with a friend present to start reconditioning my fear response. I immediately said no, but she explained that avoiding rooftops forever meant Liam got to take that away from me permanently. We needed to slowly prove to my brain that rooftops themselves weren't dangerous. I asked Courtney if she'd come with me, and she agreed without hesitation. We picked an office building downtown that had a public observation deck on the 10th floor with proper railings and security. The elevator ride up made my hands sweat, but I made it without having a panic attack. We stepped out onto the deck, and I stayed close to Courtney while we walked around the perimeter. I was trembling the whole 20 minutes we were up there, and my breathing got shallow a few times. But I didn't panic, and I didn't run back to the elevator. When we finally went back down, Courtney bought me coffee and told me I was brave. I didn't feel brave, but I felt like maybe I was making progress toward taking my life back piece by piece. Josephine suggested during our next session that I write an impact statement, not for court or anyone else, just for myself. I bought a cheap notebook at the drugstore on the way home, and that night I sat at my kitchen table with a pen. The first page was hard because I didn't know where to start, but then the words came pouring out. I wrote about the bathroom floor where Liam first hit me, about spitting teeth into my palm while he fixed his hair like nothing happened. I wrote about the roof, about his hands around my throat, about dangling over 5 stories with nothing but air below me. Page after page filled up with everything he took from me. My sense of safety, my ability to sleep through the night, my trust in my own judgment, my friendships, my old apartment, the simple act of walking down a street without checking over my shoulder every 30 seconds. I wrote about how the attack changed me, how I flinch at sudden movements now, how elevators make my heart race, how I can't watch certain movies anymore because the violence feels too real. But I also wrote about fighting back, about the brick and the broken glass, about refusing to confess to something I didn't do even when he held me over the edge, about calling the police immediately, about following through with prosecution even when people doubted me, about learning to manage panic attacks and going to therapy and building a new life piece by piece. When I finished, the notebook was half full and my hand was cramping. Josephine had told me to burn the pages afterward as a ritual of release, so I took them to the kitchen sink and lit them with a match. The paper curled and blackened and turned to ash. It felt like letting go of something heavy I'd been carrying for months. 2 days later, an email appeared in my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was blank and the message was short. It said I should remember that restraining orders expire eventually, and that some people have long memories about being falsely accused. It didn't mention Liam's name or make any direct threats, but I knew it was from him. My first reaction was anger instead of fear, which surprised me. I took screenshots and forwarded everything to Detective Sutton. She called me back within an hour and said the message was too vague to prove it violated the protective order, but we'd document it in case he sent more. She asked if I felt safe, and I realized I actually did. Annoyed, yes. Angry, definitely. But not terrified like I would have been months ago. That felt like real progress. I used part of the insurance settlement money to install a complete home security system in my new apartment. The technician spent 4 hours setting up cameras at the front door and windows, motion sensors in every room, and a direct connection to a monitoring service that would call police if the alarm went off. It cost almost $3,000, but I didn't care. I needed to feel safe in my own home. The next week, I went to a neighborhood watch meeting in the community room of my building. About 15 people showed up, and we talked about recent break-ins and suspicious activity. I met my neighbors for the first time, including an older couple across the hall and a woman with 2 kids downstairs. We exchanged phone numbers and promised to look out for each other. Building a community safety net felt good, like I was taking control instead of just reacting to threats. A letter arrived from Hannah 3 weeks after the last time we'd talked. It was handwritten on nice paper, 3 pages long. She wrote that she'd been thinking a lot about what happened, and she realized she'd prioritized her wedding over my trauma. She said she was sorry for how Dylan reacted and sorry for not standing up for me more strongly. She wrote that she understood if I couldn't be friends anymore, and she wouldn't blame me. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, just wanted me to know she recognized what she'd done wrong. I read the letter twice and felt something soften in my chest. I appreciated the honesty and the fact that she wasn't making excuses or asking me to forgive her right away. But I wasn't ready to respond yet. Maybe someday we could rebuild something, but not now. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. That same week, Courtney texted me screenshots of social media posts from Nathaniel. He was posting vague things about false accusations and how some people will do anything for attention. He never mentioned my name, but anyone who knew about the case would understand who he meant. I felt my blood pressure spike looking at his smug profile picture. I forwarded the screenshots to Xavier's office, and within 2 hours, his assistant called me back. They were sending Nathaniel's lawyer a cease and desist letter, threatening a civil lawsuit for defamation if he didn't take the posts down immediately. By the next morning, every post was gone, and Nathaniel's account was set to private. Legal pressure actually working felt surprisingly good, like the system was finally protecting me instead of just documenting harm after it happened. The 6-month review hearing for Liam's probation happened on a cold morning in November. I sat in the courthouse waiting area with Xavier while Liam and his lawyer talked to the probation officer in another room. When we finally went into the courtroom, the probation officer gave her report to the judge. She said Liam was attending his required domestic violence classes, but showed minimal engagement and often seemed to be just going through the motions. She recommended extending the protective order and continuing his probation with closer monitoring. The judge agreed and extended the order for another 18 months. Liam sat at the defense table looking angry, but he didn't say anything when the judge asked if he had questions. I felt relieved walking out of the courthouse. The system wasn't perfect, but at least it was continuing to monitor him and keep the protective order in place. Josephine mentioned during our next session that she ran a support group for survivors of intimate partner violence and asked if I wanted to join. The group met every other week at the counseling center. I was nervous the first time I went, sitting in a circle with 6 other women I'd never met. But when people started sharing their stories, I felt less alone than I had in months. One woman talked about her ex breaking her arm. Another described years of emotional abuse that left her unable to trust her own judgment. A third was still in court fighting for custody of her kids. When it was my turn, I told them about the roof and the attack and the long process of recovery. Nobody looked at me with pity or doubt. They just nodded like they understood exactly what I meant. After the meeting, 2 women came up to me and we exchanged numbers. We started meeting for coffee between group sessions, and having people who truly got it made a huge difference. A quiet Tuesday evening at home triggered a panic attack out of nowhere. I was reading on the couch when someone slammed a door in the hallway. The sound jolted through me and suddenly I couldn't breathe. My heart was racing and my hands started shaking. But instead of spiraling completely, I put down my book and used the coping tools Josephine had taught me. I focused on my breathing, counting to 4 on the inhale and 6 on the exhale. I pressed my feet flat against the floor and felt the solid surface beneath me. I named 5 things I could see in the room. Within 15 minutes, my heart rate was back to normal and I felt calm again. The attack had happened, the fear was real, but I'd managed it myself without calling anyone or falling apart. I wasn't helpless anymore. Work started going better around the same time. My supervisor called me into her office one afternoon, and I felt my stomach drop, thinking something was wrong. Instead, she told me I was getting a small promotion with a raise. She said my determination and focus over the past several months had been impressive, and the new role would play to my strengths in project management. The raise was enough to help cover my increased rent and security expenses. I thanked her and walked back to my desk feeling lighter than I had in months. It felt good to be recognized for something other than being a victim, to have my work valued for what I could do instead of what had been done to me. Detective Sutton called on a Friday afternoon with a final update about the case. She said it was officially closed from the police side since Liam had pled guilty and was serving his sentence. There was nothing more for them to investigate or pursue. She told me I'd done everything right by reporting immediately, preserving evidence and following through with prosecution. Her voice was warm when she said that many survivors don't make it through the whole process, and she was glad I had. The validation meant more than I expected it to. I thanked her for everything she'd done and we hung up. The case was closed. Liam was on probation with a felony conviction. The protective order would last another year and a half. I had a support system, a safer apartment, coping tools that actually worked, and a promotion at work. None of it was perfect, and the fear hadn't disappeared completely, but I was building a life that felt like mine again. 8 months after the attack, I woke up on a Saturday morning and realized something felt different. I made coffee, checked my email, did laundry, went grocery shopping, cooked dinner, watched a movie, and went to bed without a single nightmare or panic attack. The next day passed the same way, then another. By the end of the week, I sat in Josephine's office and told her about it. She smiled and said this was a big milestone in trauma recovery. The fear hadn't disappeared completely and probably never would, but it wasn't running my entire life anymore. I was reclaiming my days and nights piece by piece. I still had bad moments, still checked the lock sometimes, still avoided certain streets where I might run into people from that night. But those moments didn't define everything anymore. I could have whole days where I felt normal, where I forgot to be scared, where I just lived. That week felt like proof that I was actually getting better, not just pretending to be okay. The following weekend, Courtney called and asked if I wanted to get dinner. I suggested a rooftop restaurant downtown, my choice, and heard her pause on the phone before she said that sounded great. I was nervous walking into the building, my hands sweating as we rode the elevator up. When the doors opened to the restaurant, I felt my stomach tighten. But I walked out onto the deck, sat down at our table near the railing, and focused on my breathing. We ordered food, talked about work and her new apartment, and I barely thought about the height. The city lights spread out below us, and I realized Liam didn't get to take rooftop spaces away from me forever. This was my city too. I belonged here just as much as he did, maybe more now that he had a felony conviction. We finished our meal, and I felt proud of myself for doing something that scared me. I wasn't the same person I was before the wedding, and I'd stopped trying to get back to who I was then. That version of me didn't know what she was capable of surviving. This version knows she can fight back, document everything, navigate the legal system, build safety networks, and come out the other side still standing. The justice system gave me partial accountability and imperfect protection, but I gave myself something more important. The certainty that I'm stronger than what happened to me. I have better locks, better boundaries, better instincts, and a support system I built deliberately. Some nights I still check the locks twice, but most nights I sleep soundly in my safe apartment, and that's enough. And yeah, that's basically how everything went down. Wild story, right? Anyway, if you're still here after all that, maybe hit subscribe because I've got tons more where this came from. See you next time. Take it easy.